So earlier this week, we did 2 videos on Runick Ice Barrier. Now, if you haven't watched those 2 videos, I would recommend watching those ones before you watch this one, because you might get a bit confused, because I'm not really going to talk about what the Ice Barrier cards do. I promise this will be the last Runick Ice Barrier video we do for a while, because it's getting a little bit obsessive at this point. However, on one of those videos we released earlier this week, we received a comment which asked why we don't play the water barrier statue line in the list that I made. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to talk about what the water barrier statue line is, why I don't like it specifically, and I'm going to show you how you can do the line. So the water barrier statue line revolves around one card in the extra deck, and that is Deep Sea Prima Donna. Now, this card is a level 7 water tuna synchro sea serpent monster that is generic, and it has the effect, in plain English, that if your opponent has a card that is banished, you can target it, add it to their hand, and then summon a level 4 or lower water monster from the deck. So essentially, if your opponent has a banished card, you can tutor the water barrier statue directly from the deck. This is really easy to get to, since we can make it with our mirror magic, since it summons tokens, and you can climb into it as you go into a Dragite. So this is a really, really powerful card. How do you get cards banished in this deck is, well, there's a really obvious way. The Runick cards, when you use their utility effect, the effect that doesn't special summon a Runick fusion monster, they all banish cards from the top of your opponent's deck, some number depending on what the card is. Now, this is the obvious way of banishing cards from the top of your opponent's deck. The problem is with this is that you want to do this line going first, because obviously you want to summon the water barrier statue before your opponent gets to set up, which means you are pretty reliant on seeing either Runick Tip or Runick Slumber, since they're the only ones you can consistently activate on turn 1 to banish cards from the top of your opponent's deck, since they're not going to control spells and traps for destruction, or monsters for freezing curses, or monsters for flashing fire, and they're not going to control cards at all for smiting storm, and they're probably not adding to hands. I mean, there's a chance they are, but probably not. Which means you're really reliant on seeing Slumber or Tip specifically. Now, if you wanted to play the Deep Sea Prima Donna for the times that you do see Slumber or you do see Tip, that would be absolutely fine. You would still have to play the water barrier statue in your deck for those instances, but I could see somebody making an argument for doing that. The second way that you can banish cards to have Deep Sea Prima Donna live is a card like Cypher Emblem Omega, a card that you can go into that guarantees that you banish a card for Deep Sea Prima Donna. And that's the combo I'm going to show you a little bit later on. Now, there's a few reasons why I don't like the barrier statue line over just playing General Ryo. So, realistically, you're either playing General Ryo or you're playing the water barrier statue. You probably are not going to be playing both, because it's just going to make the deck too bricky, having 2 cards that you can see that essentially do absolutely nothing. Especially when you're playing Tactics as well, but obviously you don't have to play Tactics. So you're either playing Barrier Statue or you're playing General Ryo. So, in a vacuum, I think the Water Barrier Statue is more powerful than General Ryo. But in context, I think General Ryo is a stronger card for you to play. Now, the reason for this is, we are playing an Ice Barrier deck, and that means we are always going to be playing Lancia in the extra deck no matter what. So in the hands that we get to Lancia, which is a fair amount of them, we have access to General Ryo. Lancia can summon from the hand, the deck, or the graveyard, so it doesn't matter where General Ryo is, you are able to access this card. This means that if you draw General Ryo in the 12.5% of games that you are going to draw General Ryo, we can just discard this off Hugin, and the Lancia can still access this card. If we draw the Water Barrier statue, we can still discard off Hugin and potentially bring it back off of a Coral Anemone. That is a line that you can do, so it means if you draw the Warrior Bat, either of these targets, you still have ways of accessing them. However, to play this line, you are going to have to modulate this extra deck in some fashion, and I do not know what 2 cards you are going to cut for the Deep Sea Prima Donna and the Omega. Now, if you just want to play the Deep Sea Prima Donna line and use the Runick spells, you can just cut the SP, and you can play the Deep Sea Prima Donna in the extra deck. And when it comes up, sure, you can do it. If not, you just do your typical lines just ending on synchros. Absolutely fine. If you want the guaranteed way of doing this, you have to put the Omega in. Now, you don't want to cut a Hugin, because if one gets negated, you want to have a second one to be able to go into. You don't want to cut the Gary, because it gets you your Fatten back from Graveyard and Grind Games, and it's a 4, which pairs really well with your Georgius for making 10s. You don't want to cut the Sleipnir, because the Hexa is sometimes going to be level 1 when it gets negated. The Herald of the Arclight and the Toad lines you really want for a lot of your combos to stop Nib, because you summon these on summon 5. Coral Dragon, Dragonite, and Croc are all too powerful to cut. The draw 4 combo with Croc is game-winning on its own, and the Water Barrier Statue line goes through Dragonite as well, so you really don't want to cut these. You could cut the Trish, but that makes your Lancia a lot worse because it has nothing to float into, which means your opponent doesn't get punished for removing it from the field. Arguably, you could cut Chengying, but I think this card is just so good in Runick decks that I wouldn't really want to cut it, but it is certainly an option. And obviously you can't cut the Deep Sea Prima Donna because you need it in the extra deck. So this really leaves us with cutting either Chengying or Coral Anemone. Now, we don't want to cut Coral Anemone for the exact same reason we talked about earlier, that if we draw the Barrier Statue of the Torrents, we want this in our extra deck to be able to summon it back. So we don't aren't just not able to do the line in the 12.5% of hands that we draw this card. So we're probably cutting the Chengying, I guess? So let's say that we do cut the Chengying and we play this. Our extra deck is fine, but it is just a lot worse, I feel like. The hands that you get hand trapped in and you can end on SP can be life-saving in those scenarios. You probably do want to play this card, and I think Chengying is just so good in Runick. But let's assume that you do this, and you cut the General Ryo for the Water Barrier Statue. This is probably the list that you would end up with. I don't like it. I prefer the SP and the Chengying. So that's a big reason why I don't like this line specifically. The third reason that I don't really like this Water Barrier Statue line is because it's so linear in its application, especially the Omega line. Less so the lines where you banish with the Runick spells, because you can do it pretty much any time. It's so linear that just like an Imperm and the Deep Sea Prima Donna is going to make you feel so bad. But enough of talking about like my opinions on the deck. Let's actually show you the combo. So what you need for the Omega line specifically is you need Hexa and a Runick spell. So let's use Dispelling. And I'm going to put a Slumber here for something later on. So we'll do the combo here against the computer. So what we need is these cards. We'll put it on auto. So we're going to normal summon our Hexa, and we're going to use the effect of Foolish Burial. We're going to chain our Dispelling. If you don't know why I'm chaining the Dispelling, watch the second video I released. I explain it there. We use the Hexa to send the Mirror Magic, and the Mirror Magic allows us to get a search of an Ice Barrier card, of which we can search for a copy of Georgius. From here, we can use Georgius to special summon itself, and then use Georgius to summon the Mirror Magic from the graveyards. From here, we can use our level 2 Hugin and our level 6 Georgius to not go for a Dragonite, but to go for an Omega. From here, we can use Omega's effect to rip a card from hand, and then we can use our Mirror Magic to tribute our Hexa to summon 3 Ice Barrier tokens. Very slowly, because auto sims are awful. From here, we can use the Mirror Magic and the token to go for a copy of Coral Dragon. You could go straight into the Deep Sea Prima Donna, but this allows you to draw an extra card, so I'm sure you would prefer to do that. And then we can use the Coral Dragon and the Deep Sea Prima Donna, or the token, to go into the Deep Sea Prima Donna and resolve the Coral Dragon to draw a card. From here, we can use the Prima Donna to put back this card that we banished with the Omega, and special summon out a copy of the Water Barrier Statue. And then from here, we can use our Prima Donna and our token to go into a copy of Dragonite. Since it's made with Prima Donna, it can't be targeted, which is also a quite nice thing. So this is the end board, just doing this really basic combo, and it's quite strong. You have a spell and trap negate, and your opponent can't special summon monsters that aren't water monsters. The Water Barrier Statue is a little bit small, which does mean that it can be run over by a moderately sized normal summon, but the assumption is you're going to have Runick spells in your hand to protect it. Specifically, Slumber is the card that you would be looking for. But the combo itself doesn't actually protect the Water Barrier Statue, which is something I don't like. Now, obviously, this is just a 2-card combo. You could have other extenders in hand, which end you on other cards from your extra deck. Maybe something like a Croc to be able to have a pop. Maybe you have the extra Runick spell, and you can summon a Sleipnir to protect it in the battle phase before you waterlock yourself. It's certainly something you definitely could do, like when you go for the Omega, use the second Runick spell to summon a Sleipnir, then do the line as you have done previously. Then if they go to battle phase, you can Sleipnir, banish, and protect the Water Barrier statue. So the line definitely can be protected. So that's how you do it. I'm not the biggest fan, because I just think that it runs into hand traps too much. The extra deck space that it takes is not worth it. And also, I just think General Ryo is probably just a better card. In context of the deck specifically. But yeah, that is why I don't play the Water Barrier statue line and how to do it. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe, etc, etc. If you haven't watched the previous 2 videos, I would recommend you do that. And I will see you guys in the next one.